Today marks the first anniversary since the day I found myself in a strange desert. A strange desert where the sandstorms are acidic and the bipedal draconian children of Grendel live in caves. I remember that day fondly, for the most part. It was a strange, exciting, and yet frightening adventure all at once. I think it is definitely worth commemorating. Took a trip to the Dead Sea, and along the way, I stopped to admire the nature of the desert, not far from Qumran. I am sure everyone has heard of that place, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. There is a unique beauty to the Judean desert, one unlike anywhere else in the world. Perhaps it is the ungodly heat of the region that makes it all so unique. There are places hotter than the Dead Sea, but what makes it so hot is the fact it is the lowest point on the surface of the earth. Maybe the area around the Dead Sea has that special feeling because of the contrast in heights. Imagine yourself standing some 700 meters above the lowest point on earth looking down. It is a sight to behold. I have been there a few times myself. Anyhow, I have roamed around these hilltops for a while, losing myself in the beauty of the whole area. Who would have thought that a desert could be so alluring? Well, yeah, the desert can be a lovely place to explore and travel around. I am digressing, however. I ended up making my way into some cave on the side of the cliff. Not one of the famous Dead Sea caves, one completely unrelated. There isn't even much of a road in that part of the mountains. If I had to explain how to get there, I would say one has to get off Route 90, just ahead of Kalia, and turn left, and continue until you have reached the middle of nowhere on the Judean mountains. Honestly, just leave your car before the climb gets too stiff, and then continue by foot if you are interested in making the trip. Also, I think this is worth mentioning, but I feel like this one was man-made. Some of the caves in Qumran aren't natural. This one, it is definitely a special cave, a special place if you ask me. Once I stepped into this cave, I felt a hot and thick stream of air and dust brush against my body. So thick, I felt the dust make its way into my nose, causing me to go into a fit of sneezing. My lungs started itching, and my eyes immediately welled up. I coughed up whatever dust made its way into my mouth and brushed my face before jogging out of the cave. I thought there was just a build-up of desert sand particles in that cave and bolted out of there. To my surprise, I found myself standing on a completely different clifftop. The desert in front of me was completely different. The sand, it wasn't typical sand, it was almost glistening in a golden tint under the bright sun. I turned back to the cave, and much to my surprise, instead of one cave, there were several of them. I stood there for a few moments, wondering if I had missed the other cave openings when I climbed up that mountain. My thoughts were cut off by a blast of blistering hot wind hitting my face. I looked to my north and noticed a titanic cloud of dust making its way towards the mountain. I was going to turn into the cave and hide in it until the storm passed, but something caught my eye. Someone, rather. Actually, it was a group of people and some kind of animal in their possession. Or so I thought. I saw a bunch of human figures running up the side of the cliff. They ran faster than humans should be able to. The whole scenery felt a little surreal. Everybody knows you better lie low if you can't find shelter in a sandstorm. The storm was growing ever closer with each passing second, and before I could even notice, the group was nearly on the clifftop. One of them fell down, and the storm caught up to that figure. I couldn't tear my eyes away from what came next. The winds tore the clothes and chunks of flesh off of the figure like they were acid. The howls of pain echoed throughout the entire area, and within a couple of seconds, they were nothing but snorting and gurgling sounds that barely reached my ears. The others didn't even look back at their fallen comrade. It was like they were used to that kind of thing. I was so focused on the grotesque sight before me that I didn't even notice the storm about to hit the side of the cliffs. Good thing a hand grabbed my collar and pulled me into a cave before I could be consumed too. I turned around to thank whoever it was that saved my life. Then I realized I was surrounded by a group of humanoid entities clad in all black who spoke in syllables and clicks I couldn't understand. At that point, I noticed their pet was something akin to an oversized wolverine without the excessive aggression of one. Clearly they weren't local, but I was grateful regardless, albeit taken aback a little by the entire ordeal. I was somehow stuck in a sandstorm that melted people and came out of nowhere. On top of that, they were covered in black cloth from head to toe, leaving only their strange eyes visible. Their eyes were weird because their sclerae were some sort of dark brown color. However, these eyes seemed fairly human. They were talking amongst themselves in what seemed to be like an ever-increasing tone. One of them started pointing and waving its arms in my direction while the other was defending me. I think, not wanting to escalate the situation even more, I decided to resign myself. And at that moment I noticed that the cave we were in was actually a cavern. I told the creatures, who probably didn't understand me, I was going for a walk and made my way into the dark unknown. I roamed around the cavernous tunnels for a while. My watch was still functioning, so I could monitor the time spent in the cavern. It turns out I was walking around the dark, ever-increasingly moldy tunnels for over 2 hours. In the depths of the underground system, I found a luminous mold. The whole tunnel was lit up with bright green and blue lights. It is a sight I will never forget. It was truly otherworldly. The whole time I could hear the wails and moans of the acidic sandstorm outside. The idea that I could hear the wind from within the ground made me shudder whenever a particularly loud wail reached my ears. Without noticing, I ended up making a full circle and returning to the large space near the exit of the cavern. The clan of strange nomads was seated around a makeshift fire. They were eating something, one of them feeding pieces to their equally strange pet. One of the creatures called out to me in a series of squirrel-like squeaks I couldn't understand. I mentioned not being able to understand it. Once we both finally concluded that there was a language barrier, the creature motioned to me with its arm to sit beside it. I sat there, and it offered me a piece of whatever they were eating. Some sort of meat. It was probably the worst thing I have ever tasted. If I had to compare it to anything, I would say it is like eating the hide of a walrus in structure. It also had a taste reminiscent of what a new boot would smell like. I couldn't complain, though, as I was still stuck with this clan in the middle of a deadly sandstorm. We were eating all together around the fire, and the storm seemed to subside. I was enjoying my time in the company of the alien clan. I almost managed to forget they were practically a bunch of strangers. As we sat there, enjoying our meal, one of them ran out of the depths of the cavern, screaming bloody murder. The panicking creature fell right between one of the clan's members and me, face first into the fire, motionless. A metallic-looking rod sticking out of the back of its throat. I recoiled back in shock and swallowed the piece of meat in my mouth hard. I stared at the fresh corpse at my feet for a few moments. At that point, my stomach turned, and I could sense a bit of the gastric acid making its way up my throat. The other clan members shot up to their feet, pulling out daggers and other makeshift weapons they had on their person from the pouches draped across their legs. A shadow crept closer and closer from the depths of the cavern. Slowly, it grew in size. With each passing moment, it grew a few inches before its presence devoured the entire space, casting a frigid carpet of darkness over all of us, nearly snuffing out the warmth and the light created by the fire in our center. The animal tensed up and started growling angrily at the source of the shadow. It sounded like the mix of a few dogs growling in tandem. The shadow kept on expanding over us until there was nothing but sheer darkness all around the space. The fire wasn't sufficient at this point, and a cold sweat made its way across the back of my neck and down my back. The hairs on my body stood up. From the darkness emerged a creature, clad in all black too, dressed in some sort of gas mask. I couldn't make out its facial features, but I could clearly see the eyes. They glistened as a result of the light of the fire. It had the eyes of a deep-sea fish. Those weren't human-like eyes. These were eyes suited for the darkness. The thing made its way slowly, each step clearly calculated. It was taking its sweet time with us. I swallowed hard again, unable to handle the tension in the air. One of the clan members rushed towards the creature, attempting to stab it, but their weapon didn't do much. In fact, it didn't even touch the monster. One of the nomads grabbed me by the arm and pulled me upwards and behind them as if to show they were going to protect me. I complied, not thinking too hard about it all, even though in my heart of hearts I knew we were doomed. If a knife couldn't harm this thing, none of us really had a chance. The monster grabbed the hand of the one that assaulted it and then punched them so hard across the face that their jaw flew out of place. The monster then cranked the hand it had seized, forcing a disgusting sound out of the mouth of its victim, one that made my insides twist in knots. It forced the poor nomad to their knees, and then the beast just tore their head off. Orange blood sprayed all over, and my vision turned blurry as my heartbeat skyrocketed. The pet of the clan members ran up to the monster and bit it by the leg. The monstrosity didn't even register the bite. There was a flash of light, and the beast convulsed and fell down. The furry creature let go of the leg and ran up to its owners. The beast lay there motionless for a few long moments before anyone dared approach its carcass. My head was spinning, and my senses were all over the place. I was sure I was hallucinating the whole thing and was about to collapse from a heat stroke. Finally, one of the nomads approached the fallen beast and removed its mask. I stood up and joined in with the group to observe the grotesque thing beneath the strange mask. Its head was something draconian, scaly and thick. It was grey like a stone, and the features were fairly reptilian. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human or even remotely close. Its luminescent green eyes shot open, and the beast pulled itself back up, startling me. Before I could register anything, I felt someone tug at my arm. One of the nomads pulled me out of the cave and dragged me with them towards another cave. I didn't even notice how the sandstorm ended. The whole commotion in the cave completely blocked me off from the outside world. All the while they were dragging me, I could only focus on the god-awful screaming and shrieking coming out of the cave. These unearthly sounds took over everything. Time moved so slowly. I was entirely sure I was suffering through heat stroke or worse. It had already gotten dark outside by the time the nomad shoved me into the other cave. I looked back only to find the nomad being lifted off the ground, their eyes tearing up, and a trail of orange blood leaving their mouth. The beast was right behind me. The next thing I knew, I was sneezing and coughing again as bits of dust pricked in my chest, causing an irritating itching in my ribcage. I rubbed my face only to realize I'm once again being showered by the heat of the sun. My sun. I was back at the cliff on the mountains overlooking the Dead Sea. I let out a deep sigh of relief. That wasn't the end of my troubles, however. I stood there, soaking in the rays of the sun and feeling good about escaping my worst nightmare. That's when a cold and ever-expanding shadow crept up from behind me. Not thinking too hard, I ran down the hillside and back to where I had left my car. Then I made my way back to Route 90 while my heart was pounding as fast as my car was going. I remember staring at the watch and noticing that only half an hour had passed since I made my stop. This didn't make any sense at all. Good thing I saw someone driving by me, so I signaled him to stop. I asked the man what the time was, and he asked me how I could not know the time before affirming what my watch was showing. My heart sank as the man sped by. I didn't even have time to digest the whole thing then, as I noticed a massive, inhuman creature make its way slowly toward my car. No idea how it even got this fast to me with its slow strolling. I just cursed and switched gears. A car had flown by me in the opposite direction before I pressed the gas pedal. I saw it slam into the thing in my wing mirror. The draconian creature fell down, but its weight crumpled the front of the incoming vehicle, forcing it into a violent halt. I sat and stared at my wing mirror, watching attentively as the beast rose back up to its feet. It stood up and proceeded to pull the bloodied driver out of the car that just hit it. Not wanting to see the ending of that encounter, I sped the hell out of there. Honestly, if I had stayed there another moment, I might have suffered a heart attack from the sheer stress. I didn't see the bipedal dragon since, but I know it is out there, somewhere. Better be careful out there because dragons do exist, and they seem to enjoy killing for sport. These stumbling, staring, drooling fucking husks are everywhere. Lately, whenever I go out, all I see are those zombified people roaming in town, not a single normal person in sight. On top of this seemingly undead horde, it seems like we had been cut off from the rest of the world. I hadn't seen any visitors in town for weeks, not that we have too many of them anyway. The thing is, we are mostly self-sufficient around here, and when we need something, we go out of town to get whatever it is we are in need of. We also had no success in reaching the authorities recently. I think all of this began the day that Max Wilson had walked all over town begging people for water, screaming at those who refused him that they were part of a group called, according to him, the Lizards. At the time, I thought that the old geezer had lost his mind, considering that he was carrying his hunting rifle with him. A few days later, he was apparently barely responsive, although he was a rather healthy man relative to his age just days earlier. About 2 weeks after Max's paranoid outburst, he was found dead in his home, drowned in his own saliva. A few weeks after Max's passing, one night as I was making my way home from work, I came across a young man. He was crouching on the side of the road, shivering like crazy. I approached him to check up on him. When I touched the guy, he turned to me and hissed like some wild animal, drool flying out of his mouth in my direction. He had this blank stare in his eyes, almost as if he was looking right through me. I didn't even have the time to react before the man straightened up and ran off into the darkness with a distinct limp to his gait. I dusted myself off and continued walking home, assuming he was some junkie who had taken something nasty that night. The signs were written on the wall. Whatever had killed Max started to spread like wildfire. In a matter of days after my encounter with the man on the side of the road, numerous cases of trembling, blank-stared and drooling people started appearing throughout the town. We flew into a collective hysteria, posed curfews, and became awfully suspicious of each other. It seemed like we were facing a real zombie virus outbreak, except in reality, zombies don't try to eat brains. They simply waste away after turning into a mindless husk, after delirium strikes them as a result of an unquenchable thirst. The town was overrun by this infection in a matter of days after the initial outbreak. The majority of the residents became infected through contact with other infected or their bodily fluids, most commonly saliva. No one was safe, including my family. A few days ago, I woke up to the feeling of someone standing over me. I opened my eyes to be greeted by my wife and kids, My sweet Marissa jerked the children close to her as her eyes grew wide, making contact with mine. Dumbfounded, I asked what was wrong, and she and the kids stepped back as she yelled out at me the name of the man who had abused her when she was a teenager. Shocked, I shot up out of bed and tried calming her down, but she had become more hysterical with each attempt I made to grasp her. I tried calming her down for what seemed like hours, but she only got more panicked. Eventually, we filled the apartment with screams and children's crying. During my frustrated attempts at reaching my wife, she took a step back for each movement I made towards her. She was trying to run away from me. She thought I was someone else, someone who had hurt her. I was both hurt and confused by this notion in her head. Our argument became heated, and I failed to see us entering the balcony, where she slipped over an empty bottle that was lying on the floor and knocked her head on the ledge. A sickening thud sound rang in my ears as she fell onto the floor, staining the ledge and floor beneath her with blood. Her death was quick, as shards of her skull most likely penetrated some of her brain matter, killing her on the spot. At that moment, everything died out around me. Seeing my Marissa's limp body prone on the floor made me forget about the whole argument as I lunged towards her, grabbing her body, crying at her to do something, but Marissa didn't do anything. Her head just lolled as I shook her body. I refused to accept her death. I kept trying to shake her awake for hours after she had died, as both my kids and I cried and begged for her to wake up. She never even budged. 4 days had passed since, and the kids no longer respond to me or do anything for that matter. I came to accept the fact that I caused the death of my wife. I know I killed my wife. Whoever brought this plague upon us made me kill my wife. The kids just sit in different corners of the house, occasionally giving me a glossed glance that reaffirms my belief that they are infected as well. I can't do anything for them now. They are goners. This thing will leave them dead in a pool of their own drool in a matter of days, just like the rest of the husks out there. These things don't have a long shelf life. I sporadically leave the apartment to avoid seeing what has become of my family. It's just too much at this point. My inability to see the signs of my family's infection when they started excessively drinking water just proves my theory that someone must have poisoned this town to cause this zombie-like viral outbreak. Marissa's body reeks of death now, but she still looks so goddamn good. Might as well show her some of my love. But first, I have to moisturize my throat a little. I felt extremely thirsty for the last couple of hours. Many years ago, when I needed courage, I couldn't find it inside me. So, I did what every young man would do. Looked for a shortcut. I needed that boost in confidence to get where I needed to get, but I couldn't find it in any natural way. That's why I turned to the occult. Luckily for me, that's a family trade. Initially, I never wanted to get involved with that stuff, but I had no other option. Using my family's arcane knowledge and alchemic tools and materials, I summoned a great demon named Sobnak, a monstrosity shaped like a paladin with a lion's head riding a splendid horse and wielding a mighty sword. When I first saw him, I was terrified of the being before me, and he could sense it. He pointed his sword at me, threatening to tear my soul to shreds. I tossed some blessed oil onto his face, barely hitting my mark as I was shaking with fear. He growled as the sacred liquid scorched his infernal flesh. I made my best effort to sound threatening, promising to burn him to cinders if he didn't do what I needed him to. I suppose he didn't enjoy being scorched by holy objects, so he complied. I demanded he bestow upon me the courage and mental strength of soldiers. He was a demon, associated with warfare and violence. Therefore, he had to have the ability to give courage or fear to those who invoke him. The fiend smirked upon hearing my request, and boasted to me he could indeed grant my wish, though he warned me that it would come at a cost. Being young and desperate, I didn't care about the repercussions and urged him to just do it. He extended his hand and told me to hold it. As I did, I felt something hiss and slither into my skin, causing me immense pain. It hurt so much I blacked out, but when I came to, the demon was gone, and there were no marks on my body. Soon enough, I came to find out that there was newfound courage and drive inside of me. Not long after, I found out it came at a significant cost. Now every day, a lost soul from hell, disfigured by the infernal flames and endless torture, crawls out of hell to consume me. Every single day, I wake up to the sound of inhuman growling and cracking joints. Every single time I see those things, I feel like I'm experiencing a heart attack. My chest burns, it is hard to breathe, and my body stiffens to the point of hurt. The beasts come unexpectedly, attacking me from behind, throwing me to the ground, scratching, biting. They're rabid and unstoppable until they tire out. When they tire out, something snaps inside of me, and I become infuriated to the point of tearing these poor lost souls to bloody shreds. Our battles end with me standing over decimated, charred corpses that disintegrate into dust. At the same time, I am slowly burning inside my body, inside my mind. The constant state of vigilance, the constant supernatural violence, and the endless warring with demonic entities have made me hyper-aware and too angry. I've burned every bridge I could by hurting both foes and friends alike in bursts of uncontrollable rage or sudden emotional detachment. My patience with this plague has run low, and so I conjured the demon, Sobnak, again. He seemed pleased to see me, perhaps all too aware of the damage he's done. He roared at me, a pathetic attempt at intimidation. Sobnak should have known better by now. I poured the holy oil on him, burning his feline face until I could see the muscle become exposed. He growled, begging me to stop. I halted the torture, demanding to know the solution to my problem. He refused to answer at first, and so I tortured him some more, watching as he withered and howled while his flesh and armor were slowly burning off. He finally relented and told me the solution, but I didn't like it. It wasn't worth it. Losing myself wasn't worth it. Displeased with the answer I had received, I lit up a torch with the holy oil I had prepared just in case the demon was going to get rowdy, and pressed it against his body. I watched as the heavenly flames slowly ate at his form. His inhuman screams of agony didn't bother me for a while. Neither did the sight of his flesh burning and exposing his true form, an abomination whose form is pure corruption and organic decay. However, something changed when he finally stopped screaming. Something felt incredibly wrong when he stopped moving, half of his insides exposed to me. I felt wrong. I felt sick, not with him, but with my actions. My heartbeat rose. Breathing became hard. Everything started aching, and my head was spinning with worry and dread. A familiar sensation, a low growl, and the cracking of old and overused joints shot through the charred half of the demon. A hand, and then an arm, followed by a pitch-black head, and a terribly burned torso crawled out of the burning remains as I watched, paralyzed, frayed. The fiend looked sickeningly similar to me as it drew nearer. I could almost feel it devouring me with its presence alone. Before I could react, it had pinned me down, exposing its teeth and salivating all over me. The stench of its putrid breath set off a fire inside me, and I did my best to punch the abomination right in its temple. Everything happened so fast. In the blink of an eye, I was caught up fighting yet another infernal spawn. Before long, I was sitting, panting, covered in soot and demonic gore. as the remains of the demonic creature were slowly disintegrating into nothingness. The battle had left me feeling depleted and empty inside. Every single day is the same. I wake up to the feeling of terror slowly ravaging through my insides, paralyzing my nervous system, and wearing out my heart. I am entranced in this miserable state until I am forced to fight for my life against an infernal parody of myself. After each battle, at the end of each day, I am left depleted with my soul shriveled and abused. I don't know how long I'll be able to handle this, but the only available permanent solution isn't really worth it.